Good day. My name is Ann Aiken. I'm the Acting Designated Federal Officer for the National Vaccine Advisory Committee, or NVAC. I'm going to call this meeting to order, and I'd like to start by thanking all of the members. It's really just a pleasure to work with you. I wanted to thank our subcommittee co-chairs for their leadership on two subcommittees, one on vaccine safety, the other on immunization, innovation and immunization. And those people are Jewel Mullen, Bob Swanson, Rob Schechter, and Steve Rennernecht. Also, as always, I wanted to recognize the committee chair, Dr. Bob Hopkins, for his work and leadership. It's really also a tremendous pleasure to work with him regularly. And I would like to take one more moment to thank our support team who play pivotal roles in the management of the committee, including Emily Downs, Rebecca Lazaration, and Viola Jacobs. I also briefly wanted to thank our studio team, including Charles, who's been very helpful today, our sign language interpreters, and our note taker as well. And there are just a few things I need to go over in terms of rules of engagement. First, this is a public meeting. It's being recorded, and all statements made today are on the record. Second, this advisory council is governed by the Federal Advisory Committee Act, or FACA for short. FACA provides rules about the circumstances by which agencies or officers of the federal government can establish or control committees or groups like this one to obtain advice or recommendations. The voting members are special government employees and are therefore subject to conflict of interest laws and regulations, and as are all members who work for the federal government. These members previously provided information about their personal, professional, and financial interests. Each voting member's financial interest and outside affiliation has been carefully reviewed by myself, as well as another committee manager. And we do look to ensure that they comply with federal ethics laws. The liaison representatives are non-voting members of the advisory council and are not subject to the same ethics requirements or FACA rules. Additionally, the information provided at this meeting does not necessarily reflect the official position of the National Vaccine Advisory Committee or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Mention of products, processes, manufacturers, services, companies, or trademarks does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by the U.S. government, HHS, or NVAC. So with that, I'd like to proceed with roll call for a meeting. I'll take official attendance by calling up the names of each of the NVAC members. Please respond verbally when I call your name. Bob Hopkins.
I'm present and happy to be here, Ann. Thank you.
Thank you. Melanie Butler, she might be running a few minutes late. Tim Cook.
Here. Hi, Ann.
Hi. John Dunn.
I am here. Hi, Ann. Hi, Bob.
Jeff Dushin.
Good morning, present.
Good morning. Chris Arisman.
Yes, present. Oh, I'm waving, but I guess I have too much backlight, but present.
Hi, Chris. Lynn Friedland.
Hello, everybody. Present.
Hello. Dave Fleming.
Hi, Ann. Present.
Hello. Dan Hoft.
I'm here.
Hello. Molly Howell.
Hi, I'm here.
Hi. Jewel Mullen.
Good afternoon, present.
Good afternoon. Steve Rennernecht.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm present.
Hello. Rob Schechter.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Winona Stolzfus.
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning. Geeta Swami.
Hello. I'm here.
Rob Swanson, or Bob Swanson.
Hi, I'm here.
Hello. Roxana Diba.
Good afternoon. I'm here.
Hi.
Hi.
Chris Riegel.
I am here. Thank you.
Hello. Claire Hannon.
Good afternoon. I'm here. Present.
Good afternoon. Rebecca Coyle.
Good afternoon. Rebecca's here.
Hi. Kelly Good.
Hi, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Meredith Allen.
I am here. Thank you.
Hello. John Douglas. Heather Dehan.
Good afternoon, present.
Hi. Hannah Asali.
Good afternoon, present.
Hi, good afternoon. Justin Mills. Robert Johnson.
Good afternoon, present.
Good afternoon. Melinda Wharton.
Good afternoon, present.
Good afternoon. Mary Beth Hans.
Good afternoon, present.
Hello, good afternoon. And David Hinscher or Hernscher?
Yes, you got it right. Good afternoon. Yeah, I'm here.
I try. Uzo Chukwuma.
Good afternoon, present.
Good afternoon. Barbara Mullock. And Sophie Califano.
Good afternoon, present.
Good afternoon. So Admiral Rachel Levine will provide us with opening remarks today. For those of you who do not know, Admiral Levine serves as the 17th Assistant Secretary for Health. She is also the Director of the National Vaccine Program. As the Assistant Secretary for Health at HHS, she has a very broad portfolio and has played an important role in many immunization efforts. She recently attended a long COVID summit and has been out front on the surge in RSV and flu cases, the Mpox outbreak, and of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. She's an advocate for LGBTQI+ individuals and communities, and recently charged the subcommittee with 2 tasks, one on vaccine safety and the other on innovation and immunization. You will hear more about this later in the meeting, but with that, I will turn it over to Admiral Levine so she can share her opening remarks with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Anne, for that introduction. I'm really very pleased to join you all today to provide opening remarks. I'd like to welcome our members, all the speakers at the meeting, and of course, the viewers that are watching online. I also want to particularly thank the committee members for your efforts to advise the department and provide thoughtful expert guidance to optimize the immunization system in our country, which is so important. Both Dr. Bob Hopkins and Ann Aiken play a tremendous role in the leadership of the National Vaccine Advisory Committee, and I want to take a moment to sincerely thank both Bob and Ann. And thanks to all the people working every day on vaccinations to prevent infectious diseases and their impact on public health. I really consider myself an immunization champion as a pediatrician. And as an immunization champion, I know the true value of vaccinations. With COVID-19, influenza, and other viruses circulating over the last few months, we all see the need for robust collaboration, information exchange, and action to improve immunization rates across the board. And as we learn about long COVID, the best protection remains to prevent COVID-19 in the first place by following basic public health interventions like staying up to date on the COVID-19 vaccinations. I also want to congratulate the committee for taking leadership in hosting the Mpox and polio sessions at recent meetings and the measles and RSV sessions later today. Learning from these efforts is critical to future success. In my role as the Assistant Secretary for Health, it is a priority for me to build a stronger foundation for immunizations. So as you heard me say previously, leading the National Vaccine Program and this committee is truly an honor for me. For those of you who do not know, the National Vaccine Advisory Committee serves as the external advisor to HHS and provides valuable guidance on many aspects related to immunizations across the lifespan. Given the complex array of factors that can impact vaccine policy and the very valuable role our public and private stakeholders play, this committee is critical to supporting our immunization efforts. Concerns about health inequities are at the forefront of HHS immunization priorities. So I'm very pleased with the recent report that the committee approved last June to address challenges to achieving equity in immunizations and other system policy, as well as environmental barriers that result in differential receipt of vaccinations. We all have a role to play in increasing equity in immunizations, and the recommendations in the report can spur needed actions for all of us. Another barrier for immunizations results from public skepticism regarding vaccine safety and effectiveness. And that is why at HHS, we are prioritizing collaboration with local partners and trusted messengers to improve confidence in vaccines among at-risk groups. NVAC's work in this area to synthesize and summarize evidence and research addressing vaccine confidence is very helpful. Your recommendations to sustain and increase confidence across the lifespan are so important to our vaccination work. So too is spurring innovation. Innovation in vaccine development, immunization technologies, and programmatic changes should align with public health priorities and practices in the United States and globally. To this end, I charged NVAC with developing a report with recommendations outlining a vaccine innovation agenda. I asked that NVAC describe vaccine innovation priorities and actions for advancing the development of new and existing vaccines. These priorities should optimize public health and reduce disease burden in the United States. I look forward to the update the subcommittee chairs will provide during this meeting. We must work together to address the obstacles that impede vaccine innovation. Simultaneously, we must work to ensure the continuation of the extensive, long-standing, and multifaceted safety monitoring system designed to rapidly identify vaccine safety signals, minimize adverse events, and ensure the public's confidence in vaccinations. For this reason, I also charged this committee with building on prior vaccine safety system reports and reviewing previous vaccine safety efforts. I look forward to your upcoming recommendations on which strategies should be maintained for continuous improvement of the vaccine safety system. I am also very interested in your recommendations to build on new science, advancements in technology, and shifting public and partner expectations. Now, tomorrow, you will hear from Commander Valerie Marshall from the Office of Infectious Disease and HIV/AIDS Policy at HHS, who will provide a preview of an implementation report that will accompany the Vaccines National Strategic Plan. This plan helps to realize the vision set forth in the national strategy. The strategic plan provides a roadmap for all of us working in immunizations all across our country. Many of you will recall that this plan was released as a result of your recommendations to HHS. This plan addresses emerging challenges and uses a lifespan approach to vaccination. It's worth pointing out that this committee makes recommendations that further the goals set forth in that plan. In looking at the agenda for this meeting, it is clear that through the unique viewpoint of the committee, you consider current issues in immunization in a collaborative, thoughtful, and forward-thinking way to optimize the system. Your work forges recommendations that support every goal of the Vaccines National Strategic Plan. This plan was established to align us in a vision to improve immunization efforts for our country. We must all be part of a coordinated vision so that we can work together to achieve meaningful results. We must continually improve and continually grow. Vaccination is a far-reaching public health priority, and as such, it requires coordinated and sustained action from a variety of stakeholders and experts in both the public and private sectors. The federal implementation plan will help foster collaboration across the government and coordinated federal action to improve immunization efforts. Now, before I turn the meeting back over to Bob, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the 4 outgoing members serving on this advisory committee: Dr. Tim Cook, Dr. John Dunn, Dr. David Fleming, and Dr. Len Friedland. All of their terms expire before the next meeting of this committee. As this is a virtual meeting, we will send these members a certificate of appreciation for their dedicated service to NVAC. Dr. Tim Cook, one of our industry representative members, served on several NVAC subcommittees, including the mid-course review of the National Vaccine Plan and Innovation in Immunization subcommittees. Dr. Cook also worked on the report containing recommendations on preparing for COVID-19 vaccination and strengthening HPV vaccination coverage. As a representative member, Tim provided an industry viewpoint to the committee to balance deliberations and recommendations. Thank you for your valuable contributions to NVAC. Dr. John Dunn has contributed to NVAC in many ways, including co-chairing the subcommittee that worked on the 2022 Vaccine Confidence Report. Dr. Dunn also participated in developing reports in preparation for COVID-19 vaccination and to strengthen HPV vaccination coverage, as well as co-signed a letter providing recommendations on building confidence in COVID-19 vaccines. It is with sincere gratitude that I thank you for your service and your thoughtful insights. Dr. David Fleming played a vital role in the Immunization Equity Subcommittee and also participated in both the COVID-19 and HPV reports. Dr. Fleming's insights on global immunization, health equity, and innovation have been very valuable. Thank you for your contributions to this committee. Dr. Len Friedland also served as an industry representative member. I want to thank Dr. Friedland for his expertise and willingness to commit his time to this committee. Your work on the innovation, vaccine confidence, immunization equity, and maternal immunization subcommittees is very much appreciated. Dr. Friedland also played an important role in the COVID-19 and HPV reports as well. Thank you, Dr. Friedland. So may we have a round of applause for these wonderful outgoing members. It's all virtual though, in our virtual world. Yes, we should do it by the reactions. That's a great idea. There you go. Well, thank you all for our time today. I really appreciate all of your dedication, your commitment, and your enthusiasm for public health and for vaccinations. I look forward to continuing to work with you and want you to know that your expertise is very important to me and to the work of this department to improve the health of all Americans. Thank you very much. I'll turn the chair now back to Dr. Hopkins to provide the chair's welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Levine. I appreciate your comments and your dedication to our public health system and our immunization efforts. I want to welcome you all. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us virtually for today's NVAC meeting. We've had a very busy and productive last few months. And I want to thank Ann for getting us started and to the NVAC team for its work in planning this meeting and supporting the committee throughout the year. Dr. Levine, thank you again for your thoughtful remarks. I also want to thank the NVAC members and our subcommittee members for their dedication to further the work of this committee. I look forward to the presentations and discussion today and tomorrow. I'd like to begin with a few housekeeping items, and then we'll move on to the review and approval of the minutes from the September 22nd, 23rd meeting, followed by a high-level overview of the agenda. In terms of housekeeping, I want to make sure that everyone's aware this is a public meeting and is being webcasted on the HHS website. Please remember to mute yourself when you're not speaking, and please don't use your camera unless you're presenting, asking questions, or answering a question. During discussion, I ask that all members and speakers identify themselves before speaking if I didn't acknowledge you by name by giving you the floor. This helps our note taker and others to follow along. Throughout the day, there will be opportunities for committee discussion. If you'd like to ask a question or provide a comment, either raise your hand through the chat feature or send me a message through the chat feature. And send minutes to all of the members from the September 22nd, 23rd meeting. Do any of the members want to make corrections to those September minutes? Not seeing any hands raised or hearing any corrections or comments, could I get a motion to approve those minutes?
This is John. Motion to approve.
Thank you, John Dunn. Motion to approve. Can I get a second?
Chris Ayerson. Oh.
Jeff Dushin, I've got you down for a second. Thank you. And given the virtual technology, I'm going to ask if there are any that vote against approval of these meetings, these minutes. Hearing none, we will take these minutes as approved by acclamation. Thank you all for reviewing them and for participation in the September meeting as we move forward into this meeting. Now I'd like to move to the topic of public comment. As always, members of the public can provide public comment. Today, that will be by telephone at approximately 5:30 and tomorrow at approximately 5 p.m. Public comments are not a question and answer session. They represent an opportunity for individuals who'd like to make a statement to do so. The deadline to request a space for public comment during this meeting has passed. However, anyone can submit a written comment up to 3 pages in length to NVAC@HHS.gov. I'd like to spend a moment going over highlights for today's session before we jump right in. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers. We'll start the day today with a panel focused on innovative vaccine science and future vaccines. We'll then have a brief update from our Innovation and Immunization Subcommittee, followed by a panel of experts speaking on preventing long COVID. After a short break, we'll resume with a panel about the development of RSV vaccines. And our last speaker of the day, Dr. Maishika Roberts, will provide an update on the measles outbreak in Central Ohio, and we'll conclude the day with public comments. Highlights for tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll host panels focused on safety and accessibility of available vaccines. We'll first have a panel on vaccine acceptance within the LGBTQI+ community. Next, we'll hear from experts about COVID-19 vaccine safety. We'll follow this with a brief update from our Vaccine Safety Subcommittee. After a short break, we'll resume a panel on improving coverage and lowering costs of vaccination to improve adult immunization. And the final presentation will focus on the vaccine's federal implementation plan. The day will conclude with our federal agency and liaison representative updates and public comments. Finally, I'd like to speak for a moment on the upcoming meetings. As a reminder, please hold the remaining 2023 meeting dates on your calendars. Our next meeting will be June 15th, 16th, followed by September 21, 22. And please refer to the NVAC website for final details on these upcoming meetings. At this time, I'd like to start our first panel of the day, titled Unfinished Triumphs, Innovative Science and Future Vaccines. Our first speaker will be Dr. Dan Baruch, who's known for his work on immunology of viral infections and the development of novel vaccine strategies. Dr. Baruch runs the Center for Virology and Vaccine Research at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and the Center for Virology and Vaccine Research at Harvard Medical School. He'll be followed by Dr. Ali Elabedi. Dr. Elabedi is a viral immunologist that studies cellular immune responses to rapidly evolving pathogens such as influenza viruses. He's a professor at the Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis and co-director for the Center of Vaccines and Immunity to Microbial Pathogens. Dr. Baruch, I will now turn it over to you to start your presentation. Your slides are up and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hopkins. Can you hear me okay?
You are loud and clear.
Great. Well, thank you to the committee. It's a pleasure for me to join you today, give a brief update on some innovations. And I'd like to speak for the next 10 minutes on some observations that we have made in our studies of the COVID-19 vaccines and how those observations might be leveraged in the future for future innovations in both vaccine design and vaccine assessments. And the punchline of my talk today is that it might not all be about antibodies and that cellular immunity probably deserves a close look. Next slide, please. So our group, like many, many others around the world, have been studying the immune responses induced by various COVID-19 vaccines. This is a study in a small number of individuals that we published in October of 2021, in which we looked at the 3 COVID-19 vaccines that were being utilized at that point in time, the Pfizer, the Moderna, and the J&J vaccine. And we observed that these vaccines not only induced neutralizing antibodies shown on the left, but they also induce T-cell responses shown on the right. The field is really focused on neutralizing antibodies, but these vaccines do induce CD8 and CD4 T-cell responses. And I'll show some data today that will suggest an argument that the T-cell responses actually are really quite relevant, particularly against viral variants that largely escape from neutralizing antibodies. Next slide. We also have very, very good vaccines, but none of these vaccines are perfect. It's been shown by many groups, including the North Carolina Department of Health, that the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines have excellent short-term protection. This then declines over time with waning immunity. The J&J vaccine shown in green shows lower initial protection, but more stable and more durable immunity over time. Next slide. And all 3 of these vaccines have shown very effective in the CDC totality data for the United States, showing very good protection both in the Delta wave as well as the Omicron wave. Next slide. We know that SARS-CoV-2 has developed substantial variation over time. This is a figure that was made by my colleague Betty Korber, in which she has depicted graphically the switch of one variant to another variant, basically viral evolution before our very eyes up through summer of 2022, showing the transition from the ancestral sequence shown in gray to the D614G sequence shown in yellow, a variety of intermediate sequences, then largely throughout the world settling on the Delta variant shown in purple, and then an abrupt transition to the Omicron variants that are shown in red and beyond, and many subsequent subvariants of the Omicron lineage. Next slide. Our group also showed in summer of 2022 that the Omicron variants progressively escape from neutralizing antibodies. This data has been seen by probably dozens of laboratories around the world, in which the Omicron BA1 and BA2 show a substantial antibody escape compared to the ancestral sequence shown in black. But the BA4, BA5 lineage is an additional approximately threefold reduction of antibody titers compared with BA1 or BA2, both in a vaccinated boosted cohort shown on the left, as well as in a cohort with hybrid immunity, vaccinated individuals that also were infected shown on the right. So there appears to be progressive neutralization escape with the various Omicron sublineages here shown as BA1 through BA5. Next slide. But there was some very interesting observations that were noted. The substantial escape observed with the initial Omicron BA1 in South Africa was not accompanied by a complete loss of vaccine protection. In fact, quite the opposite. While many people in South Africa were infected with mild illness, then there was still substantial protection against Omicron severe disease, as measured here by hospitalization and ICU stays in South Africa, in the absence of high titers of neutralizing antibodies. This is a paper from Glenda Gray and colleagues that was published in summer of 2022. And really reflects their initial experience as the first large studies of the Omicron variant. This is after 2 shots of either the J&J or the Pfizer vaccines. Remember from the previous slide, 2 shots of a vaccine really doesn't give you virtually any measurable neutralizing antibodies. It really requires the 3rd shot to get measurable neutralizing antibodies against Omicron. So here in South Africa, people did not have a 3rd shot at that point in time. And so 2 shots of the J&J and 2 shots of the Pfizer vaccine still gave 70 to 80% protection against severe disease. This is in the absence of any measurable neutralizing antibodies. So this would strongly suggest that other immune components can also contribute to protection, particularly protection against severe disease. And so what could those be? They could be other forms of FC functional antibodies, they could be innate immune responses, and there could also be T-cell responses. Next slide. So we published a study in early 2022 that was simultaneous with 4 other groups around the world, and all 4 studies essentially concluded that the vaccines, as well as infection, induce highly cross-reactive T-cells, whereas the variants, such as Omicron, are a substantial immune escape from an antibody perspective. They really do not escape T-cell responses. So this is our data, very similar to what multiple groups published more or less simultaneously about a year ago at this time. So here we show 2 different vaccines, the J&J vaccine on the left and the Pfizer vaccine shown on the right. Here we show 8 months following vaccination. So these are not only cross-reactive, but durable T-cell responses. The CD8 responses to the J&J vaccine are a bit higher than to the Pfizer vaccine, but are both durable in both cases. The Omicron responses are shown in the Omicron spike responses are shown in green, and the ancestral spike responses are shown in black. And you can see that the CD8 T-cell responses are virtually identical. There's only less than a 10 or 20% decline of the magnitude of the CD8 T-cell response to Omicron compared to the Washington ancestral virus. Next slide. That's shown statistically here, in which there's a near linear correlation between CD8 T-cell responses to the ancestral sequence shown on the y-axis, on the x-axis, and the CD8 T-cell responses shown to the Omicron or Delta variant shown on the y-axis. Next slide. So to try to validate or to try to further investigate the potential role of CD8 T cells in protection, we did a series of studies in non-human primates. This is one study that we published last year in which you looked at prime boost, homologous or heterologous prime boost regimens with the Pfizer and the J&J vaccine, either 2 or 3 shots, followed by a high-dose heterologous Omicron challenge. And I don't have time to go over all the immunogenicity data, but I will refer you to this publication for the aficionados in the audience who wanted to learn more. Next slide. The one figure I will show you from this paper is a summary of the immune responses that correlate with protection versus failure. That's shown here. This is a study that involved 30 macaques that got these various vaccination regimens. Here, the y-axis is the CD8 T cell response to Omicron prior to challenge, and on the x-axis is the neutralizing antibody titer to Omicron prior to challenge. The animals that controlled virus very quickly are shown in black, and the animals that essentially failed to control virus are shown in red. So in the bottom left corner, we see the 6 control animals, but we also see 4 vaccinated animals with a log antibody of about 3. Those are vaccinated animals that essentially represent vaccine failure. What we notice is that the vaccine failures or the failure to control virus really cluster in the bottom part of this graph that are essentially characterized by low CD8 T cell responses and low or moderate neutralizing antibodies. So at least in this macaque model, vaccine failure is associated with either having low CD8 T cells or a combination of moderate neutralizing antibodies and low CD8 T cells. And basically, if you had very high neutralizing antibodies, it looked like you didn't need CD8 T cells. And if you had moderate to high levels of CD8 T cells, then you were in pretty good shape. Next slide. So a second study to try to address more directly whether CD8 T cells impact virologic control in the COVID macaque model, we did the following study where groups of macaques were given a vaccine, in this case the Ad26 vaccine, and then either received a sham antibody or a CD8 depleting antibody prior to SARS-CoV-2 challenge 1 week later. Animals received either a CD8 or either a CD8 alpha or a CD8 beta antibody, which depletes CD8 T cells very substantially in vivo. So basically, we vaccinated animals and then we experimentally removed the CD8 T cells prior to challenge. Next slide. So the results are shown here. Peak viral loads in BAL are shown on the left, and day 4 viral loads are shown on the right. In each graph, the rightmost 3 columns that say sham represent the viral loads in the control groups that were not vaccinated. So you can see here, these had high peak in day 4 viral loads, as you would expect with the Delta challenge in macaques. And the CD8 depletion didn't really do much, didn't really change that in any way. The first 3 groups received the vaccine, and under sham, that represents a sham antibody, and so that represents the vaccine effect, a reduction of viral loads at peak of about 2 to 3 logs, and rapid virologic control to undetectable levels by day 4. This control was partially or largely abrogated by a CD8 beta, and particularly a CD8 alpha antibody that largely depleted the CD8 T cells. So this is pretty clear and direct evidence that at least in this model system, CD8 T cells contribute substantially to vaccine protection against the SARS-CoV-2 challenge in macaques. Next slide. So we developed a proposed model for vaccine immunity against COVID-19, which I published in a review article that came out of the New England Journal of Medicine last summer. And in this proposed model, we propose that not only antibodies, but really a combination of antibodies and T cells are relevant for protection, but are probably differentially relevant depending on what type of protection you're interested in. So for protection against acquisition of infection, which I think is really not really seen, then it might be entirely an antibody phenomenon. Next slide. For protection against asymptomatic infection or mild infection, it's still probably primarily an antibody phenomenon. But the current COVID-19 vaccines, even with the boosters, are really have quite modest efficacy against mild infection against Omicron. The good news is that the current COVID-19 vaccines still provide robust efficacy against severe disease and death, particularly people who've been vaccinated and boosted. And we would argue that the totality of data would suggest that a combination of antibodies and T cells, with a particular emphasis on T cells, is probably responsible for protection against severe disease. Next slide. So John Wary and I published this viewpoint last fall in Science, in which we try to demonstrate this pictorially. So as you see on the picture on the left, when vaccines induce high titers of neutralizing antibodies, SARS-CoV-2 infection of the upper respiratory tract theoretically can be blocked entirely. You can see the virus gets neutralized in the upper airways and never really causes disease. This is probably aspirational, probably does not really occur with current COVID-19 vaccines and hypertransmissible Omicron variants. When neutralizing antibody titers wane or the virus evades antibody recognition, then it's really a combination of neutralizing antibodies and T cells that dictate protection. Robust T cell responses then block progression of infection to the lower respiratory tract. So you can see pictorially, some of the virus gets neutralized. The virus that it gets through is rapidly sopped up and killed by T cells. Disease progression occurs in the bottom panel when there's both low titers of antibodies and weak T cell responses. So the virus gets past the antibody layer, and in cells, then the T cells are insufficient to control the virus. Next slide. So bringing us up to date, we've seen beyond BA.5 the rapid emergence of even more antibody evasive viruses, BQ1, BQ1.1, and now the XBB family, particularly XBB1.5. This is CDC data as of a few days ago, showing that in the United States, 61% of viruses are currently estimated to be XBB.1.5. Next slide. And this is a paper that we published last week in the New England Journal of Medicine, in which we looked at the ability of these newer variants to escape from neutralizing antibodies. And like at least 4 or 5 other groups, we observed that BQ1.1 and particularly XBB1 really show a vast escape of neutralizing antibodies. In our estimates, even at peak titers following boosting, the BQ1.1 is about a 7-fold greater antibody escape compared with BA.5, and the XBB1 is about a 20-fold antibody escape compared with BA.5, which actually, since BA.5 is already about 10 times lower than the ancestral sequence, then the XBB1 variant antibody titers are about 100 to 200-fold lower than the ancestral sequence. So overall, the BQ1.1 and particularly XBB1 are substantial neutralizing antibody escapes, to the point where peak titers following boosting are very low, medians of about 170, 175, with some people actually having undetectable titers even at peak following boost. Nevertheless, recent promising CDC data has suggested that there is still substantial protection against XBB.1.5, and even not too much decline from BA.5. So assuming that that protective efficacy data holds up, then it's another example of how a vast diminution of neutralizing titer really doesn't have too much of an effect on protection, really raising a question whether we should rely exclusively on neutralizing antibody titers if they essentially do not correlate with protection against these new variants. Next slide. So to summarize, the importance of cellular immunity to COVID-19 vaccines, I think, has been underestimated. Data from macaque and humans suggests that both antibodies and CD8 T cells, and not antibodies alone, are important for vaccine protection. We're not saying antibodies are unimportant. In fact, quite the opposite. They're critically important, particularly for protection against acquisition of infection. But CD8 T cell responses demonstrate substantially greater durability and cross-reactivity against variants than neutralizing antibody responses. The field has been focused like a laser beam on short-term neutralizing antibody responses. And while those are important, the durability of antibody and CD8 T cell responses are likely critical for long-term protection, which is really what we need, particularly against severe disease with viral variants that show progressively increasing antibody escape. The current BQ1.1 and XBB1.5 variants show profound escape of neutralizing antibodies, even at peak immunity following boosting, and yet we still appear to have protection against these variants, which is incredibly good news and very reassuring, but also I think raises a substantial question whether we really should be following only neutralizing antibody titers as a measure of protection if essentially those are almost completely depleted to these variants, and yet we still have protection. So I'd like to stop there. Happy, if there is time for questions, happy to take any questions. The next slide just shows our annual lab retreat, which is a year ago, still being done by Zoom. Hopefully we'll have a picture for you soon, not being done by Zoom. And happy to stop there. And if there's time for questions or if the format allows, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Baruch. We'll have Dr. Alibetti speak first, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions and comments. Dr. Alibetti, your slides are up. You have the floor.
Thank you, and thanks for the committee for the invitation. And my presentation today will be talking about how mRNA vaccination in the context of SARS-CoV-2 is able to generate a robust immune memory. Next, please. So these are my disclosures. Just to highlight, there is a part of the data that I'm going to present was done in collaboration with Moderna, and this is the second part of the data. Next slide, please. So in our lab, the way we study B-cell responses to immunization, our clinical setup is very unique. We actually comprehensively follow the generation of the B-cell response. These are the cells responsible for generating the antibodies after vaccination. So we sample three different body compartments. We sample the peripheral blood, we sample the draining lymph nodes, and also we sample the bone marrow. Obviously, sampling the peripheral blood is very important because it gives us an idea about the responding antibodies and detecting them as over time after vaccination. But sampling the lymph node compartment, this is where the immune reaction, the germinal center reaction, this is the reaction responsible for not just affinity maturing or improving the quality of responding B cells, but also responsible for generating our long-term memory. And this is in the form of memory B cells and plasma cells in our bone marrow. So what I'm going to go through in the next few slides is just showing you what we have learned from SARS-CoV-2 immunization, mRNA vaccination after the primary series. And then in the second part, I'll show you what happens after the booster immunization, at least the first booster immunization. Next slide, please. So this is looking at that serum antibody against the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein after 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccination. And red showing the individuals that did not have any prior exposure to the virus. And in black, there are a few individuals who actually tested positive for the virus. And as you can see, there is a large increase, as been reported by many groups, of binding antibodies early on. And these antibodies, the levels start to decrease gradually after vaccination or for the following 6 months. And this is physiologically normal because the cells that are producing those antibodies start to die. But then what we look at next is actually how the germinal center reaction in the draining lymph nodes can actually sustain immune memory from the B cells that are actually responding to the vaccine. Next slide. So how we study the germinal center reaction, we sampled draining lymph nodes from the axillary region in humans. So this is the part where these are the nodes that actually drain the upper muscle where the vaccine is delivered. And as you can see in your right part, in the right part of the slide, that you can see that we sampled with specific needle, we sampled the cortex part of the lymph node, and the cells that we get from these studies, we study for the phenotypically how these cells are responding to the vaccine. We do sample the same lymph node over time, so we have optimized that analysis with this method of studying vaccine responses first following influenza vaccination. Next slide, please. So following influenza vaccination, and this is showing in the upper panel here, that you can detect the expansion of cells that are responding to the influenza vaccine, usually around 2 weeks, and we can see them over time. the same population. So those are the germinal center B cells. Those are the cells responsible for maintaining our memory against the antibody immune memory. And the same population seen in the bottom panel, that's the population now responding after SARS-CoV-2 mRNA vaccination. And the one thing that I want to really highlight is how robust that response is. This is 1 week after the second dose of the Pfizer vaccination. So this was great to see. This is 1 week after the vaccination, but what happens in the long term? Next slide, please. So we followed 15 individuals who never tested positive for the virus at the time for 6 months after the second immunization. This was done with the Pfizer vaccine. And you can see for 10 out of the 15, we detected in the right panel, we detected antigen-specific germinal center that are binding to the spike protein, which means that those are induced by the vaccine for at least 6 months. And this is a great indication that not just the early response that is important, but also we continue to enhance the binding affinity in these germinal center reaction to the vaccine, and also continue to perfect the binding and induce more long-term memory. But as I mentioned earlier, the ultimate goal of most successful vaccines, or most vaccines that have been approved in humans so far, is to generate these bone marrow plasma cells. These are the long-term cells that come out of this reaction that's responsible for maintaining our serum antibodies. So we asked the question, did any of those vaccines actually have now plasma cells that are specific to the spike protein in the bone marrow? Next slide, please. So in 11 individuals that give us a bone marrow aspect 6 months after the second vaccination, we detected spike binding plasma cells, and you can see in the right panel quantified spike binding plasma cells in the bone marrow that are specific to the Washington strain or the vaccine strain. Obviously, at that time, we had the frequency is much lower than the frequency of plasma cells in our bone marrow that is specific to influenza, for example, and that's totally expected, given the many exposure that we had to the influenza antigen compared to SARS-CoV-2 spike at that time. So next slide. So in summary, so far what I showed that after 2 doses of the Pfizer mRNA vaccination, we had a robust B cell response that led to a very rapid increase in serum antibodies. You can see it in the bottom. These antibodies, I didn't have the time to show you data that are, but all of this is published, that these antibodies tend to be not high quality in terms of high affinity binding to the spike, but having this persistent reaction in our draining lymph nodes can actually improve the binding, and over time we get a much better antibody. They're less in quality, but actually have better binding affinity. And also we have these plasma cells in our bone marrow that can maintain the antibodies for a long period. So what happens when we get the booster immunization? Next slide. So we did this trial in collaboration with Moderna, where we recruited either 8 individuals that got the regular booster, which is 1273 based on the original strain, or a booster that based on the monovalent vaccine based on the Omicron BA1. And this was an investigational vaccine at the time. So those are 7 individuals. And as you can see, there's many differences, residues in the Omicron compared to the original. And on the right here, we are showing you that the study design, what I'm going to show you, the blood response early and late. And for early, 1 week, and this is the data shown here, that everyone in both arms responded to the booster immunization. So this is all based on mRNA, and this is robust response in their blood. But then the question is, did we actually generate new responses with the Omicron booster compared to the participant that received the original vaccine as a booster? Next slide. So this is where we actually dissected the response in detail about the responding B cells in those 3 individuals from each arm. So we waited for 4 months after the booster immunization and made sure that none of our participants in these studies that actually got exposed to the virus infection. We verified this by there's no PCR, but also there's no seroconversion to the nucleic capsid protein, which would be an indication of virus infection during the time. So 4 months after the booster immunization, we sorted B cells that are binding to the spike protein, any of those spike protein, either the original, beta, delta, or Omicron, and then made the corresponding monoclonal antibody from single cell sorted memory cells. This is a allows us to, once we have the monoclonal antibody from these single cell sorted cells, we can test the breadth of binding of those antibodies, and we can test the specificity. So ask the question, is there any difference in individuals that got a regular or at least the Washington strain as a booster compared to the Omicron monovalent as a booster at the time? Next slide. So this is a lot of data that's summarized in one slide. There's in the left, this is the monoclonal antibody numbers in 213 monoclonals from 3 individuals that got, from memory cells from 3 individuals that got the regular or at least the original booster immunization, like the majority of us. And then on the right, 310 monoclonal antibody representing 310 different memory cells that got the booster immunization as Omicron. And the message there that we have that vaccine, as I showed you already, generated a robust response, and this robust response will mainly coming from pre-existing memory cells that was really rigorously generated by the primary series immunization. 100% of the monoclonals recognized the original strain, and we, at least at that level, we did not see antibodies that are new and binding to the Omicron, which at least in the arm that in the people that received the Omicron as a booster immunization. So we went in those 3 individuals that got the Omicron as a booster, and we looked even deeper, and we hypothesized that the frequency of those antibodies that are new, that can expand our B cell repertoire are very low. So next slide, please. So we went even dig deeper into those repertoire, and we sorted the cells and the memory cells very targeted in a targeted way to isolate the cells that bind to the Omicron. And we did manage to see at least 6 different monoclonal antibody from those 3 individuals that are only recognized the Omicron strain, but did not recognize the original strain, meaning that they're very likely coming from new B cell clones that are engaged by the Omicron booster. So the next question, where these cells bind, or where these antibodies bind on the Omicron protein or spike protein. Next slide. So not surprisingly, those 6 monoclonal recognized epitopes in the RBD part, and this is the part that is significantly different between the Omicron spike and the original spike. And those 6 antibodies are actually neutralizing to the virus, and this is done with the authentic virus in BSL-3. And as you can see, that all 6 antibodies in the right panel are neutralizing the BA1. One of them even neutralized BA5. Obviously, those subjects have never at the time were exposed to BA5. So the fact that they are neutralizing allows us to even map their epitopes. I'm not showing the data here, and these epitopes on the spike on the RBD are actually unique to the BA1. Next slide. So what I showed you, that the primary series mRNA vaccination induced a robust B cell responses to the spike protein. It's indicated. This is indicated by the robust antibody, robust germinal center, and robust bone marrow plasma cell that are generated. And then the second part is the booster immunization. I did not show you the data about the germinal center reaction. We did look back in the same lymph node after the booster immunization. We still see re-induced germinal center reaction, and then the number of plasma cells that came out of that was even increased frequency. And now I showed you earlier that the frequency of plasma cells against influenza was much higher than those against the spike. These frequencies are now much closer in people that received the booster immunization, indicating that we are now accumulating those immunizations, are now raising the level of antibodies, getting very close to the level we see for antigen that we expose so frequently like influenza. The last part is the Omicron booster. A single dose on Omicron did induce or engage more naive B cells, which is very important to expanding our B cell repertoire. But obviously it wasn't, those cells still remain rare. And there is the question whether another dose would have been even more important to visualize those cells and use their frequency. And with that, next slide, I'd like to acknowledge all of the lab members, all of the clinical partners here at WashU, all of the collaborators and the funders, and thank you for all our volunteers.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Alamedi. I want to thank you and Dr. Brugh for 2 very intriguing presentations. Looks like Jeff Dushan has the fastest hand. Jeff, you have the first question.
Thank you. Good morning. And those were fantastic presentations and really important work. So good to see. My question is a very naive one, not being a vaccinologist per se, but I'm wondering from your perspective, what the practical implications of the data that you shared with us are for producing more effective and longer lasting vaccines, and what the timeline for that might be. Thank you.
Dan?
Sure, I can tackle that one first. So I think, so one of the implications from our studies is that the reduction in protection seen with the new variants does not translate into complete loss of vaccine efficacy, as you might expect from the 200-fold reduction of neutralizing antibody titers. So it suggests that the current vaccines actually do better than expected against new variants. And that's particularly the case because of the cross-reactivity of T cells. And if it weren't for T cells, then I think that we would have seen a lot more surge of severe disease with the viral variants. In terms of practical applications, I think there's an urgent need to have vaccines that are more durable. I think my understanding of the general public is that they're not very excited of getting multiple boosters a year. One might be the most we can ask for. So vaccines that have substantial waning of antibody titers after 3 to 4 months and waning of severe disease in 6 to 9 months is not where we want to be. So I think we need new vaccine platforms that give better durability. And we know that the durability of natural immunity is better than mRNA-induced vaccine immunity. Initial protection is lower, but the durability after 4 to 6 months is better. So we need vaccine platforms that are closer to the durability of natural immunity. I'm not advocating natural immunity as a way of immunization. We need vaccine platforms that can safely induce the type of immunity induced by natural infection rather than the current mRNA platforms. And in terms of timing, I think that there isn't any immediate vaccine candidates that can do that. As I mentioned, the J&J vaccine does give substantially better durability than the mRNA platforms. It starts at a lower level, though, so that's why you can see sort of the curves cross in the middle at about 4 to 6 months. I would say we don't have an ideal platform that starts at the 95% level and stays there.
Thank you for that.
Daniel Hoft.
Thanks, Bob. Great talks, Dan and Ali. I have a question for each of you. For Dan, I am wondering what you think about the optimal vaccine for inducing T-cell responses would look like. Would it be something that would try to capitalize on cross-reactive memory induced by pre-existing common cold viruses, or should we be trying to avoid that, thinking that it might not, the wimpier types of exposures with mild infections might actually not induce the best response? For Ali, I'm wondering what you're thinking, or if you have any data about whether or not repeated doses of mRNA vaccinations are inducing a lot more plasma cells that are making IgG4, as has been reported by at least one group, and whether or not that's a bad thing.
Ali, would you like to go first, since I went first last time?
Sure. Hi, Dan. So we have looked into this in the IgG4 increase, and the one thing that we are seeing, there is a trend for increasing IgG4. So the first part of your question, so I'll go back to the first part of, we doing see after the booster immunization increase in both memory cells and plasma cells after the third immunization. That's what we have looked. We are looking now after fourth immunization. So we don't have we don't see any trend for a bias to a particular arm. Both are increasing. Plasma cells in the bone marrow, but also memory B cells increasing, not really in magnitude much, but in breadth. So we are seeing this trend so far, especially with having a robust germinal center in the lymph nodes. We do see the trend about the increase in IgG4. We haven't seen, compared that to any other platform that we didn't have a lot of samples to see if this is an mRNA specific. The IgG1, which is the main isotype, remains the majority of the plasma cells. And we have seen that with basically all viral, with influenza, we are seeing it with SARS-CoV-2 spike. Yes, there's some increase for IgG4, but still remains a fraction of the IgG1, which means the main isotype.
Thank you.
So if I can try to tackle your question on the T cell responses, although I showed data and data of others show that the different SARS-CoV-2 variants have highly cross-reactive T cell responses. Our own data, and I think Alex Sette and others, show that there is not much cross-reactivity between SARS-CoV-2 and the common cold coronaviruses. So for that reason, I don't think that trying to raise T cell immunity to the common cold coronaviruses would do much for SARS-CoV-2 and its variants. But I do think there are ways of improving T cell responses. And again, I think that the T cell responses are largely understudied and underappreciated, but likely the reason why we're not seeing our hospitals fill up with patients when we see new variants that largely escape antibodies. Strategies that could be used would, I guess, fall into two categories. One is modifications of the vaccine platform, and two is modifications of the antigens. For example, we know that recombinant vectors generally do a better job at inducing CD8 T cells than mRNA. So that's one idea. A second idea is the antigens. And one strategy that's really quite simple that I think has not really been explored much in the field is the possibility of complementing spike with an internal protein such as nucleocapsid. And nucleocapsid appears to vary less, particularly with the immune pressure that spike undergoes, and could provide more generalizable immunity against variants. And likely a better CD8 T cell immunity overall to the virus. That's a strategy very easily to implement with any platform, mRNA or otherwise, and I think deserves attention. There's also bioinformatic strategies that try to specifically optimize T cells to conserved regions, which is much earlier in a research phase.
Thank you.
We've got a couple of other hands up. I'm going to have to ask that we be brief so we don't edge too much into our next presentation. Dr. Hana Al-Saleh.
Thank you both for the presentation. Quick question to Ali. So you have demonstrated that boosting with Omicron engages naive B cells to a lesser degree than one would have hoped. However, these individuals have seen spike only via vaccination. The pandemic moved on, and identifying people who haven't been infected is becoming more and more difficult. So what do we know about the novel responses, the new B cell responses in the hybrid situation, meaning they've been vaccinated and they were infected with one of the many Omicron permutations?
Excellent question. I just want to clarify one thing, that while we don't see a lot of cells being engaged by the first dose of the booster immunization. Doesn't mean that our memory cells that are being recalled into this reaction are not getting improved and potentially enhanced in the recall germinal center reaction, which we see very robustly in those individuals. Every single person who got their booster, when we looked at 27 individuals, every single person of them had a robust germinal center reaction in their draining lymph nodes. So we have no doubt that even the memory cells that are being recalled are being refined based on the new vaccination. So we don't have data about at least in the context of germinal center and lymph nodes for infection but there are recent data that suggest that even breakthrough infections with Omicron had a very similar profile for what we saw after our booster immunization. And actually, in the case of infection, the groups looked only in blood. Everything was cross-reactive, similar to what we see, but they didn't have a chance to look deeper like what we saw, and we can get those low-frequency cells. So it seems that that infection follows what we have seen with the mRNA vaccination so far.
And Rob Schechter, you have the last question or comment.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the presentations. Looking at CDC data on slowly diminishing effectiveness against severe outcomes, hospitalization, such, I'm just wondering to what degree you speculate that it's waning durability of cellular or other responses versus immune escape. And then looking ahead to the emergence of other variants and subvariants, to what degree do CD8 assays or others predict continued protection against severe infection, or are there any correlates or hints from assays as new viruses emerge?
I'm sure I can try to tackle that. So it is clear that following an mRNA booster, there is a modest increase in protective efficacy, higher against severe disease and less so against mild illness. And I would say the benefits are particularly striking in the elderly. So certainly that's the population that should be targeted. That is likely due to the increase in the serum neutralizing antibody titer, which is seen substantially following a booster and wanes in generally 3 to 6 months. Fortunately, there are the cellular responses. I talked about T cells. Ali eloquently talked about the B cell responses. Those are the two different sides of the cellular response. Luckily, those are longer lasting. So my own interpretation, and this is somewhat speculation, I should emphasize, is that the waning that we see, relatively rapid waning against mild illness and a longer lasting, but still waning against severe disease, is generally what we see the decline from the bump we get with the neutralizing antibodies shortly within 1 month after vaccination, sort of back down to the level it was beforehand. But even after that waning occurs, I believe there is still substantially better outcomes than what we saw early in the pandemic when people had no baseline immunity at all. And I think that is the benefit of the long-lasting and durable T cell responses. I should add, although I concentrate on T cells, Ali will tell us the B cell responses are also long-lasting. It's absolutely true as well. But the cellular responses are long-lasting, whereas the serum neutralizing antibodies are really short-term. And I think that the waning that we see, and we would expect to see with the bivalent boosters, likely is that rapid waning of the serum antibody titers. So I think I would argue that while we should keep measuring serum neutralizing antibodies, we really shouldn't make policy decisions based on them.
Well, Dr. Baruch and Dr. Alamedi, thank you so much for very intriguing presentations, great discussion. We need to move on at this point to our next presentation. You're welcome to stay on with us or to move on to what other things I know you've got laid out for you for the rest of the day. Our next presentation is from our Innovation and Immunization Subcommittee. Dr. Jewel Mullen and Bob Swanson are our subcommittee co-chairs. Both are NVAC members. I think Dr. Mullen is going to lead the presentation and Dr. Swanson facilitate the discussion. Dr. Mullen, your slides are up. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I actually think that presentation was a perfect lead into this one. I'm happy to be here, be back with the committee and everyone else again, and to share this presentation with Bob Swanson, who's the other co-chair of this subcommittee on innovation and immunization. Admiral Levine referenced this work in her opening remarks. So I'm going to share with you what we have been doing since the end of October, beginning of November, and the plan for the year to come. So we can go on to the next slide. The subcommittee members are listed on the screen along with Bob and me as co-chairs. I won't read all the names unless Anne tells me I need to, but I do want to point out that my heart skipped a beat when we acknowledged the outgoing members of NVAC, because 2 of them are part of our subcommittee. So I guess I'm just going to take liberties to thank them to also be a part of this subcommittee. And to Tim Cook in particular, who sends us slides every other week before we meet, slides that Bob and I don't create, but that have helped us frame a lot of the discussion that all of the members have contributed to. We can go on to the next slide. Admiral Levine. Oh, thank you. So if everybody's not seeing what Anne has put in here to me, my heart stopped skipping beats, as she has said, Tim and Len can remain on the subcommittee as public members. So Admiral Levine touched briefly on the charge. I do want to spend time reading you some of what the full charge is, because it's a big one. We were asked to review conventional and promising novel approaches for vaccine discovery and development, to offer recommendations for actionable, high-impact activities, to recommend an evidence-based approach through which we could identify and prioritize vaccine candidates and immunization technologies, including the criteria to be used for their prioritization. And we were reminded that we should consider the potential impact on disease burden, population health outcomes, economic impact, health equity, national health priorities, scientific feasibility, as we consider the development of the approach. And while this says national health priorities, we also, as a committee, I'll just add, did spend some time talking about global considerations as well. Our report's also supposed to include a list of vaccination innovation priorities, including target antigens, molecular platforms, and immunization delivery technologies. We're asked to take a forward-looking approach to the introduction of vaccines for special patient populations and for the diseases that have been neglected in order to portray their value and importance. So all in all, with this, we have a scientific agenda outlining a framework for research direction that identifies scientific needs and gaps that should be addressed over the next 5 years. The complete charge is available through the link. We can go on to the next slide. Thanks to Anne and staff, we've been able to convene the subcommittee. And starting in early November, we have reviewed a number of relevant reports, created a reading list. It has been really helpful to have so much of the work of prior NVAC subcommittees and the knowledge and memory of so many of our members who have participated on those subcommittees and on previous reports. We've also looked at related NVAC recommendations and looked at the innovation goal in the vaccine's National Strategic Plan for 2021 to 2025. Our subcommittee has also hosted speakers discussing pathogens for medical countermeasures. And as we have continued to go back to some of the nuances in the charge, we have also challenged ourselves to go back and really review disease burden data so that as we think about priorities, platforms, innovation, new technologies, we're also being very mindful of disparities in disease burden across different populations. We can go on to the next slide. I'll share with you that though we've had fantastic conversations, in certain ways, as we're starting to think about framing the outline for our report, we're still left with the number of questions that we're asking ourselves, and we bring them up now as potential discussion topics for the next few minutes. These are questions that we've been asking and things that we wanted to share with the committee to think about. So, Bob, do you want to take it from here?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you, Dr. Mullen. I will say this has been a fascinating group to work with. A brilliant set of people with a lot stronger minds than I have, I think, when it comes to science. And I've appreciated the robust discussion that we've had. So some of the things that we brought up in the discussion that we want to open up for here as well, if people have thoughts on it, are do we want vaccines for existing diseases such as pertussis and flu, which really do need improvement, and or just diseases for which there's not a vaccine for? Do we want to include those in this report? There's been a significant amount of discussion on whether we should be looking just domestically in the United States, or if we should look globally. Should we be looking at things like HIV and malaria as part of our discussion that potentially can impact the U.S. over time? Do we want to include vaccines that might be threats to the United States over time? The other group is, should we, as a group, prioritize gaps in coverage, disease burden, health equity, pandemic preparedness, as I sort of alluded to a minute ago, the science and technology that we may want to consider for vaccines, market challenges, and one thing that, possibly even the mode of administering vaccines, such as patches and things like that. Should that be included in the report? And then we also don't want to throw away the lessons that have been learned through both COVID-19 and monkeypox. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned with both of those programs. And so what parts of those should we include in this report? And then, are there ways to innovate to improve vaccine production, access for adults, for instance, infrastructure, global regulatory and alignment, and or vaccine confidence that should be addressed in this report? This charge was extremely broad, and I know that we've struggled a little bit as a group looking for ways that not necessarily narrow it, but focus it so that we get the right charges in place for this. So these were the topics, most of the topics that we've spent quite a bit of our time talking about. Just wondering if the group had thoughts on these at all, or other members of the committee that are on, that they might have some thoughts on it as well. Or Dr. Mullen, anything you'd like to add to it?
Sure, we can start with Call Me Jewel. And then I think I'll just share with people that for a moment, we also discussed whether or not vaccines for non-communicable diseases would be part of this report, but we backed away from that. I wanted to share that with people in case anyone had actually wondered about that. And we took all of this in consideration, informed by the really timely vaccine confidence report, and with the recognition that even as we think about innovation and the critical need for vaccines, we're also beyond COVID and pre-COVID contending with declining immunization rates. So the potential for this work to also help us think about how we go forward so that innovation actually benefits the public and benefits public health, because it creates acceptable products to lessen disease burden, is also key.
We've got Molly Howell has her hand up. Molly, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I think this is going to be a great report. And I kind of like what you have put together, and I agree with looking at existing vaccines. I was also wondering if looking at combining vaccines, additional vaccines to reduce the number of injections could potentially be included. And then I just want to say, I also really like the idea of different presentations. So it's not always just injection, but intranasal and patches. I also like that that's included.
Thanks, Molly.
And Jeff Dushin left a comment in the chat, a couple of comments in the chat, and Rob Schechter has his hand up.
Thank you, and thanks for all your work. I'm thinking about HIV and tuberculosis, which are both global and domestic, and if the burden of diseases may be higher overseas, but certainly large burdens of diseases here, and that don't necessarily have to choose for that. But then also a lesson from Mpox being how fortunate we were to have, even if initially scarce supplies of a vaccine from to address the sudden emergence of Mpox from its traditional zones in Africa to spread to North America and Europe and the rest of the world. So I would consider an international focus both for narrow self-interest and for altruism as well. And then thinking about agreeing with Dr. Duchin's comments support and Molly Howell's about supporting work on existing vaccines and pertussis flu and COVID being these mucosal, what the potential is for improved protection against respiratory infections and mucosal immunity. And one last comment about COVID vaccine and the challenges for storage and handling initially around the a requirement for ultra low temperatures and to what degree storage and handling concerns can be brought into whichever antigen or whichever disease is being considered. Thank you.
Bob, looks like you're talking, but you're muted.
Great comments. Thank you. I was just appreciative.
So,
right.
and I'd like to just add to that I appreciate all of those comments. And part of our charge and discipline is to also acknowledge that there's a lot of work that's been done recently that addresses some of those very points that have been made around existing vaccines, delivery, and the reality that it's hard to think about having a national focus without thinking globally. So that all factors into how we outline this report and make this unique enough to be a contribution alongside other things, but to certainly incorporate a lot of what everyone's just said. I'll stop. I know there's another hand.
Yeah, Steve Rendernecht, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Bob and Jewel. This is a really broad charge that you received, so I respect the difficulty in kind of narrowing some of this down. I would think that through a industry standpoint, that what we've learned with the mRNA and viral vector vaccines in these last few months, years, would kind of force that issue a little bit to use those platforms a bit more, and hopefully we can take advantage of that in some of these vaccines, both existing and new. But I totally agree. The pertussis vaccine, flu vaccine, those that need some improvement, hopefully some of these new advances in those platforms will help do that. So appreciate the presentation. Good work.
Thank you for the pep talk.
All right, well, I'm going to move on to our next panel, but I'm going to encourage members of the committee, if you have other thoughts or comments on our innovation charge, please either send those by email, put those in the chat. We want to get those back to our committee and take your input as we move forward with this development of this charge report. Our next panel is Preventing Long COVID, the Science on Vaccines So Far. Our panelists are Rear Admiral Michael Aida Marco, Dr. Ziad Al-Ali from the Department of Veterans Affairs and Washington University, Dr. Theo Voss from the University of Washington, and Dr. Brandon Michael Henry from Cincinnati Children's Hospital Center. Up to 23 million people in the U.S. may have long COVID or the longer-term impacts of COVID-19. Of those people infected with COVID-19, CDC estimates that 13.3% have symptoms for a month or longer, and 2.5% for symptoms for 3 months or longer. More than 100 symptoms can appear after a COVID-19 acute infection affecting multiple systems. In this panel, we're hearing from a number of esteemed speakers. Admiral Aida Marco is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Science and Medicine in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health at HHS. He'll provide an overview of the federal efforts to address the longer-term impacts of COVID-19. Dr. Al-Ali is the Chief of the Research and Development Service at the VA St. Louis Healthcare System. He'll discuss ways to prevent long COVID and opportunities and challenges in studying and preventing long COVID. Dr. Voss is a professor of health metric sciences at the University of Washington. He's joining us from the Netherlands to discuss disease estimates. And Dr. Henry is a researcher at Cincinnati Children's Medical Center who'll provide an overview of systematic literature that he and several colleagues recently published. And I will now turn things over to our first panelist, Dr. Aida Marco. I see your slides are up. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to the committee for including this topic on long COVID. As you stated, I'll start off with a general overview, and then the following speakers will go into more details. Next slide, please. And so this focuses on the federal response and doesn't really cover robust response by state and local public health, academia, and other non-governmental organizations. But in April of last year, President Biden outlined actions to address long COVID and more broadly, the longer-term impacts of the pandemic, COVID-19. And that promulgation was a call to action that reflects the administration's commitment to addressing the ongoing impacts of the pandemic. It's organized across the entire federal government with over 14 departments involved, many also in HHS, to identify existing federal services and supports for people living with long COVID and the longer-term impacts of COVID-19. And a separate report lays out the National Research Action Plan on long COVID to improve the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention as we move forward. The process was very rapid and completed in 120 days. We took a relatively informal, ad hoc, but very robust approach to listening sessions with community members, patients, healthcare, and research partners. Next slide, please. And those reports came out in August of 2022. This is a quick snapshot of the departments that were involved. Next slide. And the research plan, I'm going to focus on that next, builds on ongoing efforts across the government to enhance services for people experiencing long COVID. So the intention was that the U.S. government agencies would inform Congress and researchers, both public and private, to include academia, of course. And it's also relevant to other groups such as state policymakers, foundations, and funders of research, healthcare, service personnel, pharmaceutical companies, and the general public. Next slide. And this gives you a high-level overview of 4 points related to the National Research Plan and sort of the high-level methodology. Next slide. And the plan was informed by 4 overarching guiding principles: health equity, accelerating and expanding the current research, orienting the research effort to improve patient care, and partner engagement. Next slide. So this slide, you can lump them or split them. We in the end, we came up with 7 priority areas that would benefit people the most, we thought, from this framing, keeping in mind this is before August. And so we wanted to characterize the full spectrum, clinical spectrum of long COVID and diagnostic strategies, pathophysiology, the public health thinking around surveillance and epidemiology, our broader sort of wellness perspective around long COVID and overall well-being. Fifth, therapeutics and other health interventions. And importantly, people are having difficulties now or throughout the pandemic. And so 6 was health services, supports, and interventions. And importantly, health services and health economics research, an area that's starting to emerge most recently. And so vaccines can fit in a number of places here. 3, for example, number 3, 5, 6, and 7, for example. Next slide. And the plan presented a number of strategies that would advance its implementation. So it called for a long COVID coordinator, and we have a draft approach to that in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health. Proposed a framework for a multi-pronged approach to surveillance. We've just stood up last week a data and surveillance subgroup. Rapid implementation of clinical trials. We'll talk more about that later. NIH, CDC, and the VA are the most prominent in doing research with clinical trials on the horizon, both for NIH and Dr. Adali will tell us a little bit about the VA. Taking advantage of national real-world evidence to our approach to long COVID. Long COVID centers of excellence to integrate patient engaged care and research. So in the omnibus, there was a mark out for that to be led by AHRQ. Primary care networks to develop, implement, evaluate, and scale patient-centered models of care for long COVID. And never forget workforce, of course, recruit and retain investigators tracking interdisciplinary long COVID research. Next slide. The current federal long COVID research portfolio demonstrates innovation and early achievements and highlights the importance of collaboration among the public and private sectors in all the areas, some ahead of others in terms of prevention, diagnosis, treatment, provision of healthcare, the public health perspective, and human services. And on this slide, I list here the 4 ongoing federal research initiatives that will yield insight into these priority areas. And there's much more if you read the report and a dedicated appendix, which details a lot of players and a lot of federal activity. Next slide. So moving into sort of a high-level view of the role of vaccination research, it's a long report, and so there's not a lot of words on, it covers a lot of area, there's not a lot of words on each different aspect of things, but vaccination is included, and the plan builds on ongoing efforts across the government. It's intended for U.S. government agencies, as I've said before, and let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit here to just say a few quick words about long COVID if you're haven't been tracking or following. A lot of data is emerging. It used to be we would wait a week or two for the next article, but in the scientific literature, but now it's really difficult to keep up. There's a lot of information maturing at this point in the pandemic, although we still have a lot to learn. It's slightly more common in women. Well, first of all, it's hard to define in different terms and terminology, and that's another whole subject that I won't go into, but we're spending a lot of time and effort on. We recently secured the National Academy of Medicine and one of their standing committees to start organizing the progress we made in publishing the report. But depending on which bucket of long COVID you're looking into, because it's not one thing, long COVID is slightly more common in women. It's people with severe COVID or need hospitalization or ICU care are more likely. People with underlying health conditions can have more complicated and severe long COVID. There's some good, reasonable studies on vaccination that'll be covered in another presentation. And of course, health disparities are another vulnerable point. Next slide. So this slide lays out some of the details and questions that we raise in the National Research Action Plan related to vaccines. A lot of studies focus on adults for the understandable reasons, and progress is needed with regard to adolescents and children and underlying medical conditions and other specific risk factors. And there's an appendix D that includes information on vaccinations and boosters. Some of this is being looked at through studies that utilize electronic health records, for example. Next slide. Let's see if I missed a slide here. No, I got that one. Next slide. No, that's it. Yeah, stay there. Sorry. Made a mistake here on what I'm looking at. And so current federal research on vaccination is categorized here at a high level. That includes some major efforts. NIH is with Recover, EPIC with the VA. The DoD has a registry. FDA, VA, and CMS are collaborating in a number of ways to bring the data together that I think will comment on vaccines. And CDC is conducting multiple longitudinal assay studies to look at the questions. Next slide. And this is something I think for the committee to look at and comment on, either here or in subsequent venues. This is our framing in the National Research Action Plan from August. And so your input here, I think, is kind of focused across the presentations and across the report. Next slide. Okay, thank you very much. And we move to the next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Rear Admiral Iadamarco. Our next presentation is Dr. Ziad Al-Ali. Dr. Al-Ali, your slides are up. You have the floor.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for introducing us at the beginning. May I have the next slide, please? So in terms of disclosures, I've consulted for Gilead and Tonix, and I am employed by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. However, the opinions presented here are solely my own and do not represent the views of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs or the U.S. government. In funding for our work was received, or we obtained funding from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and also from the American Society of Nephrology. Next slide, please. So I thought I was asked to talk a little bit about our thinking about how do we prevent long COVID. So in terms of outline, I'd like to sort of present you a little bit with a broad overview of what we think long COVID is, and talk a little bit about the effects of vaccination on long COVID, and then very briefly discuss the role of antivirals and long COVID, and then discuss the opportunities and challenges of studying and preventing long COVID. May I have the next slide, please? So we think we take a counterfactual approach in thinking about long COVID, and I know that sort of it's ingrained in the public consciousness that long COVID is maybe, fatigue and brain fog or maybe dysautonomia, but when you take a sort of a really wide sort of a systematic approach, comprehensive and systematic approach using counterfactual thinking to long COVID. May I have the next slide? You will see that really the long-term effects of SARS-CoV-2 infection, which we think that's really the true long COVID, encompasses multiple injury in multiple organ systems and can yield increased risk in mental health disorders, nervous system problems, metabolic dysfunction, including hyperlipidemia and diabetes, GI or gastrointestinal conditions, skin disorders, a lot of coagulation problems in the form of DVT and PE and macroclots, and in some cases microclots, cardiovascular disease, and this is really a big one, obviously respiratory conditions, kidney conditions, musculoskeletal pain, musculoskeletal conditions, and also, generalized disorders like malaise and fatigue. And for the virologists among you, this is really not a surprise. A virus could wreak havoc in multiple organ systems. It really should not come as a surprise. We know about post-Ebola syndrome. EBV can lead to multiple sclerosis. So a lot of viruses can cause long-term manifestations. The SARS-CoV-2 is unique, and it's not in that regard. It's unique because maybe it's novel and it's new on Earth and has not been here for more than several years. But it's not unique in its ability to also produce long-term effects in multiple organ systems. May I have the next slide, please? So that's really our thinking about long COVID. Long COVID is really an umbrella term that encompasses the long-term effects of SARS-CoV-2 infection. It's not really only brain fog and fatigue. It's much, much more complicated than that. We sort of think this is really actually important to really make sure that we're not leaving any stone unturned, that we're comprehensively, assessing the burden of disease that results from the viral infection. How does it stack up against the flu? So, in all the analyses that we've done to date, and we've been doing this intensely, researching this intensely over the past 3 years, SARS-CoV-2 infection leads to higher risk of health problems than a seasonal influenza. And even with the different variants, and the argument has been that the variants have maybe produced less or a milder disease, the risk remains substantially higher than seasonal influenza. And to the post-acute manifestations, not only the risk is higher, but also the breadth of organ dysfunction that you see with SARS-CoV-2 is much, much more extensive. So it's a different kind of post-viral syndrome, quote unquote. May I have the next slide, please? So, we faced this question a lot from a lot of patient advocacy groups and a lot of key stakeholders in the country and also globally. Does reinfection matter? And this is our analysis published several months ago in Nature Medicine, suggesting that, even among people who've been vaccinated and previously had one infection, a second infection contributes additional risk. We're not saying a second infection is necessarily more severe than a first infection, but reinfection contributes additional risks, both in the acute phase of SARS-CoV-2 infection and in the long COVID phase or the post-acute phase of SARS-CoV-2 infection. Next slide, please. So what's the effect of vaccine on long COVID? And we think that definitely vaccines reduce, but do not abrogate completely or do not eliminate the risk of long COVID. And because long COVID is not one thing, you have sort of decomposed the influence of vaccine on injury in different organ systems. And this is sort of a slide that sort of summarizes risk reduction, both on the relative scale and also the absolute scale in different organ systems. And you can see, all of them are less than one, so that's a good thing, but it's really heterogeneous. The most risk reduction is really happening in the coagulation problems, reducing the risk of PE and DVT, the clotting cascade, and also reducing the risk of pulmonary disorders. There is certainly risk reduction in the cardiovascular space, the kidney space, neurologic disorders, but much less pronounced. So overall, certainly vaccines reduce the risk of long COVID, but do not eliminate the risk of long COVID. The risk reduction is variable for different organs. Next slide, please. And we are now have actually a pretty robust pipeline to investigate the roles of antivirals in abrogating or reducing the risk of long COVID. This is, early results that we released in preprint form in November, currently under review in one of the journals, suggesting that Paxlovid use in the early phase, within 5 days of symptom onset, reduces the risk of post-acute manifestations, including post-acute death, hospitalization, and PASC, defined using a counterfactual approach, the approach that we use in our studies. Next slide, please. And this is sort of the survival curves for PASC in both groups who were untreated and people who got Paxlovid within 5 days of symptom onset. There is about 26% reduction in risk on the relative scale. Next slide, please. And so we think about the best way to prevent long COVID is really to prevent COVID in the first place, prevent infection or reinfection. And obviously we see a role of current vaccines in reducing the risk of long COVID. and potentially vaccines could be, further evolved to be, maybe, even more robust, longer lasting. And I think you guys have talked about this, in an earlier session. There is clearly a role of antivirals and people who qualify for them. I showed you some results about Paxlovid, but we don't think this is really specific to Paxlovid. We think that actually maybe, other antivirals might, with an emphasis on might, also reduce the risk of long COVID. We're aware of that this is really an evolving, field. There are a lot of people working on it. There's recently a trial suggesting that metformin might reduce the risk of long COVID. I think this is really need to be investigated, further to better understand why would a metabolically active drug like metformin would reduce the risk of long COVID. But I think that's really a very, very interesting way of thinking about potentially therapeutics or prevention strategies. And some suggested even drug combinations, metformin plus antivirals or other tools to further reduce the risk of long COVID. Next slide, please. When Anne invited me to do this, she basically, mostly wanted me to talk about what are the opportunities and challenges of studying and preventing long COVID. So this is really the slide, Anne. The opportunities, I think this is really a historic opportunity to study the post-viral condition. This is a pandemic. The scale and the scope of the pandemic really represent an opportunity not only to deepen our understanding of SARS-CoV-2 itself, but really more broadly to understand the post-viral condition. And those opportunities don't really come every year. Thankfully, they don't come every year. But I think there is a silver lining here in that we can sort of leverage the enormity of the moment, the scope and scale of this pandemic to really understand SARS-CoV-2 and understand other viruses better, and really help us being better prepared for the next pandemic, because they're going to happen. You guys, I don't need to tell you on this concept, but they're certainly going to happen. And it behooves us to really learn as much as we can from the moment now to prepare us for the next pandemic. And I really think also one of the other really bright and really wonderful spots in this pandemic is really patients emerge as partners. They actually in a lot of space they led the way in characterizing long COVID initially, in calling it long COVID and coining the term, referring to themselves as long haulers. And I think this really will go down in the annals of medicine as really a major inflection point in patient participation and patients leading research and leading the moment and leading us to sort of pay more attention to this. And I think really better understanding the post-viral illness in general will also help us understand infection-associated chronic illnesses. So this broad basket of infection-associated chronic illnesses that we so poorly understand at the moment. And in my view, we've ignored it for a long time, for decades. So this is really the moment to shine a light on this and better understand it for the reasons I've outlined previously. And I think really, a refrain in our work and a lot of other work is really this bidirectional nexus between infectious diseases and non-communicable diseases. A lot of people sort of put them in separate buckets and don't really, realize that there's really this bidirectional arrow between infectious diseases and non-communicable diseases. And that, infectious diseases could actually result in non-communicable diseases, diabetes and heart disease. And these diseases, diabetes and heart disease, in turn, can also heighten the risk of getting infections and developing serious outcomes after infections. Those are very, very, very important links to make. And what are the challenges? I think I sort of showed you a bit of our thinking about the counterfactual thinking about long COVID, how is an umbrella term. You'll see a lot of different terms and definitions out there. And I think there needs to be some effort, hopefully an inclusive effort that includes all the people who've been working diligently on long COVID for a long time to really, build momentum toward more consensus around what terms and definitions we could use to sort of, keep moving the ball forward in a faster way. There is a lot of sort of a variability in how people think about clinical endpoints and long COVID, and that's also important to sort of, navigate this challenge gracefully. And in our view, and personally, I'm talking personally, I really think there needs to be a whole lot more a whole lot more clinical trials in the space of long COVID. It's an important national crisis and needs to be addressed. And our response to it must match the scale of the crisis. And I think more needs to be done. Next slide, please. I think that's probably my last. So thank you again for having me, and would be looking forward for the Q&A after this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Ali. Our next presenter in this panel is Dr. Theo Voss. Dr. Voss, your slides are up and you have the floor.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to present. Next slide, please. We recently published a pooling effort of existing studies, either published or studies we sought out to collaborate with, including the fantastic work that Ziad has been doing on the VA database. This is part of our work on the global burden of disease, and our remit is to be comprehensive in measuring sources of health loss in the world. And so we chose a number of symptom clusters that wouldn't easily be captured under other diseases that we also measure within the global burden of disease study. So we concentrated on ongoing respiratory symptoms, fatigue with bodily pains and mood swings as a cluster, and a cluster of cognitive symptoms. And we used the WHO definition to start counting a new case of long COVID 3 months after an acute episode. Next slide, please. So initially, we had a look at what literature existed at the time, and that gave a rather low yield. In the end, we managed to extract data from 44 published cohort studies. But the big limitation is that they either report on single symptoms or on a number of symptoms, rather than what constitutes a combination of symptoms that lead to the disability of the individual. I mentioned working with Ziad on the VA data. We also had a private health insurance database that we could query. There we saw the advantages of having very large numbers and ability to define controls. But the limitations there are that you have to rely on what is translated into ICD codes based on symptoms being presented. We got most of our information out of 10 ongoing cohort studies in different parts of the world. And that allowed us to quantify not just the frequency, but also the overlap of these symptom clusters. And importantly, 4 of these cohorts explicitly asked about health status and symptoms prior to COVID-19, because all of these symptoms occur rather frequently in the general population, and hence you need to look at the difference. That's the sort of counterfactual approach that Ziad was referring to. Next. We then fit it into the framework we use for the global burden of disease study, where we have disability weights that quantify the amount of health loss for a particular type of health state. And those are being derived from population surveys where people react to lay descriptions of these health states and provide answers that we can then translate into these disability weights. And that's important for us because it's the bridge between fatal and non-fatal outcomes, and an essential component of our disability-adjusted life year measure. And it allows us to quantify the relative severity of long COVID against all the other diseases for which we make measurements in the global burden of disease study. Next slide. So headline results. Our estimate is that these 3 big symptom clusters affect 1 in 10 women after COVID-19. 1 in 20 men, and 1 in 40 children. So quite a big sex differential, and also quite a bit higher in adults compared to people under the age of 20. You can see in the colors that there are, the individual clusters occur rather frequently, but in more than 30% of the cases, people have symptoms that belong to 2 or 3 of the 3 symptom clusters that we quantified. The overall level of disability in these disability weight terms was 0.23. And just as a reference, that is the value that we use for complete hearing loss, so deafness, as well as the long-term consequences of moderate to severe traumatic brain injury, indicating a relatively high average severity. Next. Just a short peek at the analyticals that we use. These are on the x-axis follow-up days, and then on the y-axis the proportion having a symptom cluster or several combined symptom clusters. You can see that the risk in hospitalized cases is higher than in non-hospitalized cases. But there are so many more non-hospitalized cases that the vast majority of people with long COVID arise from milder infections. With these curves, we can estimate what the proportion of cases is who still fit a case definition at 1 year, and that's 15% of those who had the diagnosis at 3 months, according to the WHO definition. So there's quite a bit of recovery, luckily, but of the 15% of a very substantial number of people in the world who start having these problems, how many of those will become chronic, and maybe very chronic cases, more in the order of what we see for chronic fatigue? That time will need to tell, and we need to wait for studies with longer follow-up. Next. So our estimate is that in 2020 and 2021, there were 145 million new cases of long COVID in the world. 90% of them started in people who had less severe initial infection. 64% females, and the counts increased over time from 41 million to 94 million in 2021. We make these estimates for every country in the world by age, sex, and for quite a few countries also by subnational units. Next. Then, our estimates, still rather preliminary for 2022, deal with a change in landscape. We have got a shift from earlier variants to Omicron variants being dominant. There's also the effect of vaccination, and then there's the effect of a potential effect of reinfections. What the little that we know from these follow-up studies is that there's a lower risk of long COVID in 2022 that is at about a third of previous, at the time of previous variants, but it is really hard to disentangle how much of that is coming from the variant type, how much of it from vaccination, how much of it from reinfections. Our estimate is that in 2022, there were 94 million cases globally, and that is compared to the 104 million in 2021. So the much lower risk per infection multiplied by a much higher number of new infections comes to similar case number between the 2 years. Next slide. This shows you the estimates that we've made for the US states, where we estimate there were 1 million new cases in 2020, increasing to 3.6 million in 2021 and 5.7 million in 2022, with a much increase, as you can see, state by state in these graphs, but some parts of the US seeing much higher, these are age standardized rates of new cases than others. Next. So, we still have to deal with sparse and, quite heterogeneous data. And that leads to rather wide uncertainty in these estimates. We're, having data to work with that go up to 12 months follow-up after infection, but to understand what happens with the tail who are still a case at 12 months, we need much longer follow-up information and understand whether they are continuing on a path to recovery or may end up having much more chronic and longer-lasting disease. We, in these estimates, do not include the increased risk of other diseases that Ziad was mentioning. For the purposes of the global burden of disease, those would be expressed in increased numbers that we are making for those diseases already. Even with the symptom list often mentioned for long COVID, we haven't included all. That in the largest of the cohorts where we could do a very detailed analysis, it indicated that we captured the most severely affected cases with these three symptom clusters, and that largely the cases that we did not capture were people who had sub-threshold manifestations of these three clusters, plus a host of other symptoms on top of that. There are relatively few studies from low and middle income countries, but wherever people have looked for long COVID, they found it. There are also, the studies from places like India, Brazil, Bangladesh, South Africa, some of which we were able to include in our pooled estimates, some that did not have enough information for us to do so. Next slide. This will be my last on the implications. It's important to quantify that there's a considerable risk of ongoing symptoms after SARS-CoV-2 infection. The average amount of disability is sizable. The majority of cases occur in people of working age, and that has a lot of implications for support. Luckily, as I said, most recover within a year, but 15% of many million is still a lot of people who are still a case 1 year out from infection. As there are no effective treatment known at the moment, the support needs to concentrate on rehabilitation and income social support and help people to transition back into the workforce or their education when these symptoms start to wane. But clearly it's important to better understand these mechanisms of these post-viral conditions. Here, there's a big focus on long COVID with potential genetic autoimmune persistent virus hypotheses. But understanding what's happening to people with long COVID will also have a lot of benefits for other post-infection syndromes and potentially also for people with chronic fatigue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Voss. Our next presenter is Dr. Brandon Michael Henry. Dr. Henry, your slides are up. You have the floor.
Thank you. It's an honor to be speaking to NVAC today. My goal in the next 10 minutes is to provide you a 30,000 feet overview of published data regarding the impact of vaccination on long COVID. Next slide, please. I'm going to focus on summarizing the results of a systematic review at the request of Anne. We published this review in Lancet's eClinical Medicine in August, such that all the studies I will discuss today underwent a methodologic quality and risk of bias assessment by our team of investigators. And the summary of findings I'll present to you today have been peer-reviewed. Next slide, please. I'd like to point out that none of our investigators declared any conflict of interest, and I just wanted to acknowledge the funding for this work. Next slide, please. So when designing our investigation of the available data to date, we aim to answer two important questions. One, what is the impact of COVID-19 vaccination on the risk of developing long COVID? And two, what is the impact of COVID-19 vaccination on existing long COVID symptoms in COVID-19 survivors? Next slide, please. So we applied the PICO principle, population intervention comparison and outcome, to define our inclusion and exclusion criteria. So our population consisted of adults with confirmed SARS-CoV-2 infection. We included as an intervention any type of vaccination. In reality, from the literature, there were 4 vaccines that were included. That's the Pfizer, Oxford AstraZeneca, Moderna, and Janssen. And the vaccine doses could have been administered before or after acute SARS-CoV-2 infection. For our comparison group, we used individuals not receiving any COVID-19 vaccine. The outcome was a collection of multiple symptoms developed after acute SARS-CoV-2 infection that were confirmed by personal, telephone, or electronic means. And we included any type of symptom across all organ systems appearing after an acute infection, in line with Dr. Al-Ali had described earlier, and that we really have this multi-organ impact going on with long COVID. Due to the different definitions of long COVID used in the literature, there was no specific follow-up period required for inclusion in our analysis. That's quite variable, as we'll talk about a little bit later. There is the WHO standard, but that's not been frequently used among studies, especially earlier on. And eligibility included observational cohort, cross-sectional, and case control studies where samples of COVID-19 survivors, either hospitalized or non-hospitalized, were followed for the presence of symptoms appearing after acute SARS-CoV-2 infection before or after COVID-19 vaccination. Next slide, please. Our team performed a search of a wide range of electronic databases and preprint servers. Following screening and eligibility review, we identified a total of 17 studies to be included. 11 were published peer-reviewed studies and 6 were preprints. Among those, 2 used a case control design, and 15 were cohort studies, with 6 using a cross-sectional design and 9 a longitudinal design. Overall, we identified 2 types of studies according to the relationship between vaccination and acute infection. One were studies investigating the development of long COVID symptoms in people who had received the COVID-19 vaccine before being infected, and 2 were studies investigating changes in long COVID symptoms in people who had been previously infected, developed long COVID, and then received the vaccine. Overall, unfortunately, there is just too much heterogeneity in the literature to really allow for any type of well-performed pooled analysis or meta-analysis on this issue, so we did not perform one. Next slide, please. 6 studies with a total sample of over several million participants reported on the development of long COVID after COVID-19 vaccination. The countries of origin of these studies included the United States, which included Dr. Al-Ali's study from Veteran Affairs, the UK, and India. 5 studies provided data on mRNA and vector vaccines received by participants, while the remaining 1 study actually did not report what vaccine the participants had received. 3 studies investigated patients who have received at least 2 doses of vaccine, while the remaining 3 studies only required 1 dose of vaccine. And the key findings are summarized on this slide. All 6 articles agreed that vaccination before SARS-CoV-2 acute infection was associated with reduced risk or odds of long COVID. There was, however, high heterogeneity in the time from vaccination to infection, with some preliminary data suggesting that people who have been vaccinated a month before being infected have a lower risk of developing long COVID symptoms. So there does seem to be an effect of that duration, where the longer you go out, the reduced protection you get from vaccination in terms of preventing long COVID. Evidence from 2 studies suggested that 2 doses could be effective for reducing the risk of long COVID than a single dose, and unfortunately, we didn't have any booster data. And finally, preliminary data did suggest that mRNA vaccines were more effective for mitigating the risk of long COVID compared to a vector-based vaccine. Next slide, please. 11 studies, which included over 36,000 COVID survivors, reported on changes in long COVID symptoms in people who had previously been infected, developed long COVID, and then received the vaccine. Among these studies, 4 from the UK, we had 2 from the USA, 1 from France, Italy, Israel, Japan, and Switzerland. So we did get a good global perspective, and it is a global problem, as Dr. Voss has noted. So it's good to have a wide global perspective on this particular question. 3 studies included the mRNA vaccines only, 7 included both mRNA and vector-based vaccines, and 1 did not specify the type of vaccine. All studies include patients with at least a single dose. And again, the key findings I summarized here. But we did see a bit of difference. What was reported in the literature, there wasn't really a consistent outcome in regards to these studies. 7 articles agreed that there was improvement in long COVID symptoms with at least 1 vaccine dose, 2 of which reported that 2 vaccine doses restored the reported symptoms back to baseline. However, 4 studies reported no change of long COVID symptoms in the majority of participants. 1 study reported that vaccination doubled the remission rate of long COVID, while another study noted that participants who experienced worsening of their long COVID symptoms after vaccination were reported to have elevated antibody titers. So overall, the results with respect to the impact of vaccination on existing long COVID symptoms are quite mixed. Next slide, please. Importantly, I did want to touch briefly on the methodological quality and risk of bias of the included studies. I think it's important, and it was assessed with the Newcastle-Ottawa scale. And we're really happy to see that overall the methodologic quality of the included studies was quite high. For the 2 studies that used the case control design here, 1 was deemed to be of high methodologic quality, 1 of medium methodologic quality. Next slide, please. And among the 15 cohort studies that we had, 14 were of high methodologic quality and 1 was of medium methodologic quality. So again, we really that was really a strong point in our review. Next slide, please. A few important limitations of the presented data that I just wanted to note that I think is important. First, data on the effects of vaccines on long-term post-COVID symptoms are scarce, since most studies identified in our review investigated the risk of long COVID in people infected within the first month after being vaccinated. There's very little data, only a few studies that really push out beyond that window. There's also really no consistent definition of long COVID in the published literature. I can say it has improved from earlier on in the pandemic. Here we had 7 studies that used the WHO definition, while they used variable definitions. But that variable definition, especially in time course, can certainly impact our assessment of these results. Next, limited data was available with respect to hospitalized versus non-hospitalized patients or sex difference between males and females. I think there was only 1 study that actually looked at hospitalized patients. I think that was by Dr. Ali out of Veterans Affairs. And it kind of showed that, with increasing level of care required in the acute phase of infection, you had an increased risk of developing long COVID symptoms, of course, highest in ICU patients and then hospitalized patients, and followed by non-hospitalized patients. No evidence was available in the included studies on the SARS-CoV-2 variants that caused acute infections. Most were performed in the earlier phase of the pandemic during the early vaccination campaigns. And of course, now doing this study, now it gets a bit more complicated, and that has led to, I think, really a big challenge in trying to understand this problem, just because there's so much, on the one side, so much broad exposure in the community to spike. I think it's hard to find anyone who hasn't had that exposure. And of course, a widespread vaccination. So studies in regards to how that variants have impacted this particular questions remains very unclear. And finally, the role of boosters sort of in the same context in terms of preventing, or even in the therapeutic side for long COVID is also unclear. Next slide, please. I did want to touch a little bit on that because I think it's an interesting question, and we published a review on that, evaluating the risk of long COVID in the context of different variants. We had 6 high methodologic quality studies that included over 100,000 patients infected with either the historical variant, Alpha, Delta, or Omicron. And the prevalence was certainly higher in individuals affected with the historical variant as composed to Alpha, Delta, or Omicron. And the available data suggests that infection with Omicron, the Omicron variant, results in fewer long COVID symptoms compared to previous variants. However, the small number of studies and really the lack of control for confounders, and even if you tried to control them, it's very difficult to do so, including reinfections or vaccine status in some studies, really limits the generality of these results. Next slide, please. And finally, really, again, going back to that variant-specific long COVID vaccine impact, one of our co-investigators recently performed such a study evaluating the differences in long COVID symptoms between vaccinated and non-vaccinated hospitalized COVID-19 survivors infected with the Delta variant. And their study observed that COVID-19 onset was associated symptoms and post-COVID symptoms 6 months after hospitalization was similar between vaccinated and non-vaccinated hospitalized COVID-19 survivors. Again, sort of pointing to what we saw in our review and the fact that, that protection sort of diminishes over time. Next slide, please. So just a few conclusions that I think are my take-home points here. Low level of evidence, grade 3 case controls cohort studies really suggest that vaccination before SARS-CoV-2 infection could reduce the risk of subsequent long COVID. So I think that's certainly a positive. The impact of vaccination in people with existing long COVID symptoms is still controversial, with some data showing changes in symptoms, while others, as we saw, demonstrated no change. And of course, these findings are limited to the 4 vaccines that were used in the studies presented. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'll turn it back over to the moderator, and looking forward to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henry, and I want to thank all of the members of this panel. Very interesting responses and thoughts around long COVID. I'll open it up at this point for questions or comments from members of the committee. I see the first hand up from Daniel Hoft.
Thanks, everyone. Great panel, very important work. I wanted to make a comment and just ask you all a question related to it. I think it's really important for us to determine whether or not long COVID is something specific to SARS-CoV-2, or is it related to the host being so immunologically naive to a new pathogen that is virulent and highly transmissible. Of course, that both, either way, it's important to know. And I think that if it's the latter, Dr. Ali's comment about studies looking at the interactions between infectious disease and other non-communicable diseases becomes even more important. So I was wondering what you guys think about. Is this specific, or is it more that the host is encountering such a virulent, transmissible, novel pathogen?
Well, I can start. I would have to say that I think it's both. I think that is both, specific. I think we see a higher rate of post-viral syndrome with SARS-CoV-2 than we've seen with, for example, influenza. I think Dr. Ali sort of pointed that out. And I think, the challenges we've seen that we're facing sort of speak to that. Right. We certainly have many other had other viral infections and outbreaks and different things. I don't think we've ever quite seen something quite like this. So I think it's a combination of both. I think it's specific to the virus. I think it's specific to host response. And I think that's certainly going to be a challenge. But I think, as Dr. Ali had said, that, certainly what we learned from this can certainly be applied going forward in the future to other potential pandemics and other viral conditions we do see quite frequently post-viral syndrome.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, the little that we know of the risk of these kind of ongoing symptoms following other infections suggests similar levels of ongoing problems post dengue and Ebola, but as was mentioned, quite a bit lower for influenza.
I think what's unique about, thank you for the question. I think what's so unique about SARS-CoV-2 is its novelty. Like that's a major unique factor. And I think we still have a lot to learn. So this is a very important question. And we definitely need a whole lot more data over the next several years to sort of learn, sort of more about the post-acute sequelae of SARS-CoV-2 and how do they stack up compared to other viruses, flu and other viruses.
I'm just not sure the flu is a good model to compare since there's so much pre-existing immunity.
And to add that, I think it's challenging because, even if we look at, previous humoral responses to previous coronaviruses, commonly circulating coronaviruses, there's really mixed data about how that sort of impacts one's risk for, progression to severe illness with acute SARS-CoV-2. So I think it's a complex question. I think it's going to take quite a bit of time and research to really unravel.
Jeff Dushan.
I'd like to just start by thanking all three of you for providing us with the early evidence base on which we can start to think rationally about long COVID and post-acute COVID symptoms. My question is really about how we use this information in formulating vaccine strategy and strategy around the implementation of other mitigation and prevention measures for COVID-19. For example, currently our thinking is driven primarily by case, hospitalization, and death reporting. We know the case reporting is incredibly unreliable currently, and hospitalization and deaths are going down. But how do we're failing, in my view, to incorporate the significant burden of illness caused by the conditions that you've described to us, the long COVID conditions. And so when we think about, who should be vaccinated and how frequently they should be vaccinated, and whether people should be wearing masks and what they should be doing around gathering in indoor air, we're not incorporating what seems to be a very profound health impact of COVID-19. So I'm wondering if you can provide any thoughts or suggestions on how we can better use the information that's already available about the profound health impacts of COVID-19 that you shared with us on in developing our prevention strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dushan. This is Michael. I don't have an answer to your question, but I would strongly agree. And I just watching, like all of us participating in this pandemic on one end or the other for the last 3 years, there's been an interesting balance between all the intervention measures and how that gets communicated, where vaccines has been a prominent one, and how that gets balanced, and then the evolution of the rationale from death to hospitalization to severe illness and now long COVID. And I know that inside the government and outside the government, people who are paying attention to long COVID have struggled to interject or add that rationale to the messaging as the evidence base is emerging. So I would strongly agree, and I don't have any, maybe the other panelists have answers to how we do that.
Well, one thing that comes to mind is that there is a flipping of the sex ratio of risk. Acute infection, much higher risk in men, higher death rates in men, whereas long COVID affects women more. And in terms of the numbers, where acute infection causes most health loss in the elderly, just by the sheer numbers, most cases of long COVID are in adults of working age. And hence, if you start thinking about strategies for vaccination and boosters, if you take that into account, you may come to a different strategy than when you just look at the risk of death or hospitalization.
Certainly, I definitely agree, and I think the focus has so far been on cases, hospitalization, and death, and we really think that's really the tip of the iceberg. Beneath that is really the long-term effects of the infection, which, as Theo pointed out, actually disproportionately impact the working population, and think about the impact on the economy, et cetera, et cetera. So when we think of how to really solve this problem, and specifically from the angle of vaccines, I think several things become really clear, and you guys touched upon them already. Maybe vaccines that are more durable to enhance uptake among the population, because people are going to be sick and tired of having to go get vaccinated every little while. A pan-coronavirus vaccine, I think one of the challenges that we've had in this pandemic is that we've been almost always reactive. By the time we had a bivalent vaccine, which is BA4 and BA5, BA4 and BA5 have been on the decline, and now we have new variants that we have, or subvariants that we have to contend with. So more comprehensive, strategy for COVID and also beyond would also be helpful. And really, the major I think finding in long COVID that really can happen in people who have mild disease or even asymptomatic disease. What does that really mean for you guys? That means actually placing a larger emphasis or premium on reducing transmission and reducing risk of infection in the first place. There's a lot of focus on reducing risk of progression to severe disease, hospitalization and death, or severe outcomes. But I think also we need to be cognizant of the fact that long-term outcomes, as Theo has wonderfully shown us in his work, really mostly happen in people who have either asymptomatic or very mild disease. That, in my view, places a much higher premium on preventing infection, reducing transmission. Probably via you guys are the expert, mucosal immunity or vaccines that sort of induce stronger mucosal response. So those are my thoughts about these questions.
But just a short comment on that. We found in the cohort studies, we had very little evidence to point at a risk of long COVID in people with asymptomatic infection.
I want to thank all the members of this panel. It's very interesting presentations and some great questions and comments. I apologize to Dr. Schechter. He has a comment in the chat that we don't have time to get to. I'm going to have to give us a stop at this point for about a 5-minute break. We will come back at 3:30 Eastern Time for our next panel, Innovation Insights, Progress on Preventing RSV. Thank the members of this panel and all of our participants in our NVAC meeting for today.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.